Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Cursed Painting. It had been a particularly cold and damp autumn on the Isle of Wight, the kind of season where the island seemed perpetually shrouded in mist, and the sea lashed endlessly against the rocky cliffs. Polly Arnold stood at the entrance of her new house, a quaint Victorian cottage nestled at the edge of a secluded woodland. It had been her dream to move to a quiet place like this, away from the noise of the city. But as the wind whistled through the trees, she couldn't shake the strange sensation that someone was watching her. Holly shrugged off the feeling, brushing her blonde hair away from her face as she fumbled with the keys. The cottage was exactly as she had imagined it, full of old-world charm, with creaky wooden floors and stone fireplaces that added to its timeless character. She had been particularly drawn to this house because of its rich history, though her friends had warned her that old homes often came with their own peculiar stories. As she wandered through the house, admiring the craftsmanship of the staircases and the hand-carved banisters, Holly found herself in a dusty, forgotten room at the back of the house. There, propped against a wall, was a painting and oil portrait of a beautiful woman. Her dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, her expression serene yet sorrowful, her emerald-green eyes seeming to follow Holly wherever she moved. The signature at the bottom read Adelaide Hawthorne, 1889. Holly stared at the painting, mesmerized by the delicate brushstrokes and the woman's haunting beauty. A small part of her felt unnerved by it, but the feeling passed quickly. She decided it would look perfect above the fireplace in the living room. With some effort, she hauled the painting down the hole and hung it in its new place of honor. Over the next few days, Holly began to notice odd occurrences in the house. It started with small things, the sound of footsteps upstairs when she was downstairs, or the soft creak of doors closing when no one else was there. The temperature in the living room, where the painting hung, often dropped several degrees for no apparent reason, causing her to pull her jacket tighter around her whenever she passed by. One evening, as the wind howled outside, Holly sat by the fire, staring at the woman in the painting. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, and in the dim light, Holly could swear the woman's lips had curled into a faint, sinister smile. She rubbed her eyes, telling herself it was a trick of the firelight. But the sensation of being watched grew unbearable. That night, the nightmares began. In her dreams, Holly saw the woman from the painting, dressed in a flowing white gown, walking through the fog-shrouded woods. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and in her hands she held a dagger dripping with blood. The woman whispered in a language Holly didn't understand, her voice soft yet full of malice. Holly would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart racing, only to find the painting's cold eyes staring back at her from across the room. The longer the painting remained in her house, the worse the dreams became. She would hear the woman's voice even when she was awake, a soft, eerie whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Holly began to lose track of time. Days bled into nights, and the boundaries between her waking life and the nightmares blurred. One evening, after a particularly vivid dream where the woman had whispered her name over and over, Holly decided to do some research. She visited the local library, poring over old records and newspapers, trying to find out more about Adelaide Hawthorne, the woman in the painting. It didn't take long for her to uncover a chilling tale. Adelaide Hawthorne had lived in the very house Holly now called home. She had been an artist, known for her beauty as well as her talent, but her life had ended in tragedy. According to the records, Adelaide had been betrayed by her lover, a wealthy landowner who had promised her marriage but instead left her for a younger woman. Heartbroken and humiliated, Adelaide had locked herself away in the cottage, where she eventually took her own life. The locals claimed that her spirit never left. The painting, it was said, was cursed. Adelaide had poured all of her sorrow and rage into it before her death, and anyone who possessed it would fall victim to her wrath. Over the years, every owner of the painting had met with a violent and mysterious end. Holly's hands trembled as she read the accounts. She thought back to the strange occurrences, the whispers, the nightmares, and her heart filled with dread. She had to get rid of the painting. But when she returned home that evening, the cottage felt different. The air was thick, oppressive, and the sound of the wind outside had risen to a deafening wail. Holly approached the living room with growing unease. As she stepped through the doorway, she froze. The painting was no longer hanging on the wall. It was lying on the floor, face up, as if it had been violently torn down. The glass over the frame had shattered, and the woman's face now appeared twisted in an expression of pure hatred. Holly's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, but her foot slipped on something wet. Looking down, she saw dark red stains spreading across the floorboard's blood. Her own blood. A sharp pain erupted in her arm, and she screamed as she saw a deep gash running from her wrist to her elbow. But there was no knife, no broken glass. It was as if something invisible had slashed her skin open. The house groaned around her, and the temperature dropped suddenly. Holly backed away, clutching her bleeding arm, her mind racing. She had to leave now. As she turned to run, she heard a soft voice, like a breath of wind. "You cannot escape me." Suddenly, the front door slammed shut on its own, the locks clicking into place. Holly frantically tugged at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, filling her ears, echoing through the house. She turned and ran for the stairs, hoping to find an open window upstairs. But as she reached the top of the staircase, she saw her. Adelaide Hawthorne stood at the end of the hallway, her ghostly form illuminated by the flickering light of the fire downstairs. Her once beautiful face was now a mask of rage and sorrow, her eyes dark and hollow, and in her hand she held the same dagger from Holly's dreams. "You took what was mine," Adelaide hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Now you will join me." Holly's scream was swallowed by the darkness as Adelaide lunged forward, her dagger raised high. Pain blossomed in her chest, a cold, sharp agony that spread like ice through her veins. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, her vision blurring as the life drained out of her. The last thing Holly saw before the darkness consumed her was Adelaide's face, hovering above her, a twisted smile playing at her lips. The next morning, the Isle of Wight police found Holly Arnold's body in the cottage. The official report listed her death as a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs. But the locals knew better. As they always had, they whispered about the cursed painting, now mysteriously missing, and the vengeful spirit of Adelaide Hawthorne, who still roamed the island, seeking her next victim. And somewhere, on a misty autumn night, the sound of a woman's soft whisper could still be heard drifting through the trees. "You cannot escape me." After Holly's tragic death, the cottage on the Isle of Wight sat empty, shrouded in mystery. Word of her demise spread through the small island community like wildfire, and soon no one dared go near the old Victorian house. It wasn't just the history of Adelaide Hawthorne that kept people away. It was the chilling realization that every soul who had ever come into contact with that cursed painting had met a gruesome fate. For months, the cottage remained abandoned, its windows dark and lifeless, with the fog rolling through the trees like an omen of death. Holly's belongings were left untouched inside her furniture, her books, even the painting, though the authorities could never find it. It was as if the portrait of Adelaide had vanished into thin air. Until one crisp winter evening, when a stranger came to the island. Leila Davidson was a young art historian, intrigued by the legends of cursed objects and haunted locations. She had heard whispers of the cursed painting while attending a lecture on supernatural folklore and was immediately captivated by the mystery surrounding Adelaide Hawthorne's tragic end. Leila, determined to uncover the truth behind the legend, made the journey to the Isle of Wight, her heart full of curiosity and excitement. Upon arriving, she booked a room at a small inn on the outskirts of the village. The innkeeper, a weathered old woman named Mrs. Prout, eyed Leila with suspicion the moment she mentioned her interest in the cottage. "You'd best stay away from that place, dear," Mrs. Prout warned as she handed Leila the keys to her room. "Nothing good ever comes from meddling with the dead." Leila smiled politely, but she didn't believe in curses. She saw the stories as nothing more than fascinating folklore exaggerated over time. Still, she appreciated the islanders' respect for their local legends. The next morning, Leila set out to explore the area, her destination clear in her mind, Holly Arnold's abandoned cottage. She had spent the previous night researching Adelaide Hawthorne's life, learning about her rise as a talented artist, her doomed love affair, and her descent into madness. Leila felt a strange connection to Adelaide, perhaps even sympathy for her. She didn't see her as a vengeful spirit, but as a misunderstood woman, driven to despair by heartbreak. When Leela arrived at the cottage, it appeared exactly as she had imagined, isolated, with creeping vines wrapping around its stone walls, its windows dark and cold. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. The front door, however, was slightly ajar, as though someone had left in a hurry. Leela hesitated only for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. Dust motes danced in the sunlight that filtered through the dirty windows, and the wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She wandered through the empty rooms, her breath misting in the chilly air. Everything seemed untouched, as if frozen in time since the day Holly had died. There was no sign of the painting, though Leela had expected as much. According to the legend, the cursed portrait often disappeared after claiming a victim, only to resurface later in the hands of another unfortunate soul. As she entered the living room, Leela noticed something odd. The fireplace, which had not been used in months, still smelled faintly of smoke, and there was a single chair facing the empty wall where the painting had once hung. Someone had been here recently. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it just for a brief moment, a shadow moving across the room. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Just an empty room and the oppressive silence. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming now, a prickling at the back of her neck that sent a shiver down her spine. She slowly backed away, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But as she reached the door, she heard a soft whisper, a woman's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Find me." Leela's blood ran cold. She turned around, her eyes scanning the room frantically. The voice had been so close, as if someone had spoken directly into her ear. And then she saw it, barely visible beneath a dusty sheet in the corner of the room, a shape, rectangular, like a large picture frame. Her breath quickened. Could it be? Leela approached slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. She reached out and pulled the sheet away, revealing the painting she had come all this way to find. Adelaide Hawthorne's eyes stared back at her, just as beautiful and haunting as the stories had described. But there was something different about the painting now. Adelaide's expression was not serene or sorrowful. It was twisted in anger, her lips curled into a malevolent grin. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the door behind Leela slammed shut with a deafening crash. The shadows in the room seemed to grow longer, darker, as the air filled with a low, menacing hum. Adelaide's eyes in the painting began to glow, a sickly green light that pulsed with energy. Leela stumbled backward, her mind racing. She had read about cursed objects, but nothing had prepared her for this. "You shouldn't have come," a voice whispered, and this time it was clear Adelaide's voice, echoing through the room. Leela felt an icy grip on her wrist, as if invisible hands were pulling her toward the painting. Panic surged through her. She tried to break free, but the force was too strong. The painting's glow intensified, and for a brief moment, Leela thought she saw movement within the canvas. Adelaide's hand, reaching out. "Ah!" Leela screamed, pulling with all her strength. But it was no use. The shadows swirled around her, and the world seemed to tilt as the painting's influence grew stronger. And then, in an instant, everything went dark. When Leela woke, she found herself lying on the cold floor of the living room, her head pounding. The painting was gone, and the room was once again silent, but the oppressive presence lingered. Disoriented, she stumbled out of the cottage, her heart racing. As she looked back one last time, she saw a figure standing at the window, a woman with dark hair and glowing green eyes, watching her with a sinister smile. Leela didn't return to the cottage. She left the Isle of Wight that very night, shaken to her core, but alive. The painting, however, would resurface soon enough, perhaps in another forgotten room, perhaps in another unsuspecting home. And with it, Adelaide Hawthorne's thirst for vengeance. Because some curses never die. And Adelaide was far from finished. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.